listening to ProveText, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello, welcome to ProveText. I am Michael Halcomb, and I'm here with Dr. Frederick J. Long. Fred, how are you?
Hey, pretty good. Thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm hanging in there. It's been a rough few weeks for me health-wise, but I feel like I'm kind of coming out on the other side of it a little bit healthier now, and yeah, still got a lingering cough, which is annoying, but doing all right.
Yeah.
We're here in Hawaii. We're in our rainy season, kind of. Although this week hasn't been too rainy, it's kind of cooler, about around 70, and yeah, everybody's wearing sweaters and sweatshirts and all that sort of thing. So,
It's turned cold here. Getting down below freezing at night. Some snow flurries. So yeah, well, it's that time of year. It's end of December, beginning of January. I guess we're in Christmas tide.
Yep. Yeah, what is it, the 5th day of Christmas today when we're recording this, I believe?
Yeah,
I think so, 5th day of Christmas. So I can't remember what the true love brought on the 5th day of Christmas. 5 golden rings, I guess. Is that right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's 5 golden rings.
I've never received 5 golden rings. I don't know what that's like.
You know the song, though, right? The 12 Days of Christmas.
Yeah, but I haven't memorized it like you.
5 golden rings. It's like the only one I remember. Yeah, anyways, so I think I was probably until my late 30s, I didn't realize the 12 Days of Christmas started on Christmas. I always thought they led up 12 days leading up to Christmas.
Yes, I know.
So it wasn't until I became familiar with the liturgical calendar that I learned that no, day 1 starts on Christmas. So yeah, anyways, day 5
is leading to Epiphany, right, which is January 6th.
Right.
And that's the Greek Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas then, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's interesting.
In Ethiopia, we'll do that. Yeah. So, well, we haven't met for a little while to do some of these ProveText episodes, and we're on Galatians, and we're in chapter 6, and we're making our way down the home stretch. I think today we have in view 3 verses, which I don't know if we've ever done that, but one of them's really short, and we'll take Galatians 4 and 5, 6, 4 and 5 together, and then 6 on its own as well. So, I guess we should get to reading, and you see where things go. I'm going to go ahead and pull the Greek text up here on the screen for those watching. If you don't have, if you're not watching and just listening, that's fine too. You'll still be able to hear the text. I'll read it in Greek and then we'll discuss it. So here's Galatians 6, 4 and 5. To the ergon evtu dokimazeto ekastos. I always want to say eskatos when I see that. Ke tote is afton monon to kavchema exike uk iston eteron. Whoa, what is that? What is that noise? Some kind of timer go off?
No. Notification.
Your phone, maybe?
Yeah, I turned it off.
Ekastos garto idion fortion bastasi. Man, so a couple of these words kind of tripped me, I guess. Maybe because I'm not as familiar, like fortion. I kind of just want to say photion, but fortion kind of got me a little bit. I noticed we did have a lot of epsilon stuff going on. Ergon, EF2, ekastos, is, EF-ton, exi, is, eteron, ekastos again. There's lots of epsilon stuff going on there in the verse, but yeah. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the discourse context. We're looking at 4, 5, and 6 right now. In verse 7, there's a shift to second person plural, but in these verses, we're seeing third singular, and we're seeing it's a good time to practice our the third singular imperative form, which seems kind of weird. We normally think of imperatives as second person, but to have them as third person is a little bit weird. And then verse 3 uses this indefinite construction. Like if someone thinks himself to be something while being nothing, he is deceived in his thinking. So it's kind of interesting. So these verses really do go together. 4, 5, and 6, they focused on ekastos, each one. So he's really kind of talking about like our own kind of like responsibility, and like we kind of are responsible for ourselves. So, and I think that's consistent with the de. So it's kind of interesting that verse 4 has a de, so distinctive development. Moreover, let each one discern or test and approve his own work, and then he will have a boast in himself alone only, and not in another. 4, so that's verse 4. So then verse 5 begins with a gar. So for each one will bear his own load. For each one will bear his own load. Yeah. Moreover, so verse 6, the one having, the one sharing the word, or the one kat ekumenos, being instructed the word, let him share with the one instructing in all good things. So interesting. Yeah. So 4, 5, and 6 there. I guess we're doing verse 6 a little bit later. Did you read that one yet?
So it's interesting that the NIV is insisting, because I have that pulled up here. All right, so if you go back to 3, if anyone, so you have the doki, igar, dokitis, if anyone thinks, right, and then they switch to they deceive themselves, when in fact it's a third singular, he deceives himself. So they translate it, they deceive themselves, they make it plural, right? And
they're
then
trying to deal with the gender pronoun issue.
Then as you keep going, they do the same thing. Each one should test his own actions, and then that one, but they say then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves. But it's not plural anywhere that I see.
Yeah, that's good to observe that. They're really struggling with this contemporary issue of pronoun, how to be inclusive and genderless in the pronoun. So they're avoiding the he and she. He, the he, to making it a they. Of course, in verse 3, you have the indefinite pronoun. You can use anyone or someone, but then they have to switch to the they. So that's why they're doing it. And then each one obviously is singular, but then they move it to their own actions. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah. So I see a lot of individual responsibility in a sense. Like each person has responsibility. And it's clear that people are supposed to be testing their own self, in a sense, their own work, and then on that basis they will have something to be proud of, to have some kind of boast. And it kind of seems weird that we could think of having a boast, but actually there can be a positive basis of boasting. I was generally taught that boasting is bad, but you can do a word study in Paul, and there are grounds for legitimate boasting. You can boast in others' achievements. Now Paul will argue that in 2 Corinthians, like in terms of being proud of somebody, but here he wants to avoid that. So it's interesting that at this point in his writing and discipleship of the Galatians is that there's a situation where people are trying to take pride in other person's social performance or religious performance. And so people are trying to circumcise or have people circumcised or conform or come under the law in a way that they can be proud of. And Paul says, no, he's really being preemptive here. Just pay attention to your own activity, your own work, and test and approve that. Dokimazo is a really important word of like testing the quality
but
or
there is
worth
some
of
tension
something.
here
It involves a
between Galatians
discernment and
6
an
5
evaluation.
and
So he basically says, evaluate yourself, and then you will have a boast only in oneself and not in another. So he's trying to take the attention away from others in terms of somehow gaining social status via others and their performance, which really does make sense because, I mean, I've been listening to Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, Epictetus. If you're putting any kind of worth or value in what other people do, you can't control that. It's not a basis for that right now. Now, Paul will talk about having a boast or presenting each other before the Lord and being proud of that work. So it's interesting. I'm just trying to correlate what Paul is saying here because I see that elsewhere in his writings, he does talk about having a favorable esteem of and even co-boasting in each other in a sense. I suppose that
well,
would
there's
be
a
in kind of like a mutual environment, right, where there's mutuality and mutual support and helping each other get to be to Christ. But here he's really distancing from that kind of thing. It's interesting to see.
well, I think there's a inherent tension between Galatians 6:2 and Galatians 6:5. For Galatians 6:2, he says, carry each other's burdens. In this way,
Yeah.
you fulfill the law of Christ. And then in 6:5, each one should carry their own burden. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, which is it? Is it carry each other's burdens, or vastazete, or is it vastasi?
Yeah.
You carry your own burden. Which one is it?
Yeah.
And how to make sense of those seemingly contradictory statements? I think there's some
Mm-hmm.
just inherent tension here. I believe in our previous episode when we were talking, I was suggesting the idea that this is a financial. He's speaking financially here, um, and that I'm not the first to make that argument, but that when he's talking about burdens, that he may be talking about financial burdens. So carry each other's financial burdens, and this way you fulfill the law of Christ. Yet then he says each one should carry their own financial burden. So yeah, I think one way to maybe make sense of some of that is just by looking at the sort of honor, shame, and patronage ideas running throughout the culture. Patronage being right where you have a patron and then clients. And so if I'm a patron, I have clients beneath me, and part of what they do is work for me, but also work in such a way that it bolsters my honor, um, and and prevents me from having shame, so that if perhaps if we view one another, if we all have the same patron, then we're all working toward the same goal of carrying each other's burdens to honor God. Um, but within that, I'm also doing my own individual job of carrying my own burden. So maybe that's one way to make sense of it, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what's going on is the same verb is used, bastadzo. So I think one way that
Right.
I would begin to distinguish those is the object of the two. So in verse 2, it's
Yeah.
bare, which is it's to baros, which
Mm-hmm.
is particularly, it says something particularly oppressive or burdensome. It has a broader kind of usage, I believe. Whereas in verse 4 or 5, fortion is used in the gospel tradition of the oppressive burden of the law. So that's interesting to me, because Jesus says, my yoke is easy and light. And then in Matthew 23:4, Jesus says they tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they are unwilling themselves to move them with a finger. So I'm wondering if verse 4 and 5, notice that it's its own de. So that's this distinctive development, and 5 is supporting 4. And boasting, I think we're talking about boasting in the law and the work of the law kind of things, which are burdensome, which are can be burdensome. So in verse 5, each one will carry his own law burden, whatever that might be. So whatever someone wants to choose to do, that's up to them. And here I guess I'm thinking of like Sabbaths, uh, festivals, perhaps, food laws. Um, in Romans, for example, Paul says, one person holds these as special, one not. One person avoids meat, others not, whatever. So and he says that's okay. Just don't judge each other on that basis. So I'm suspicious that this direct object, the difference between tabare and to idion fortion, that the fortion, verse 5, is like a law, kind of like what one decides to do with these kinds of issues which are controversial. Like that's up for you to decide what to do. It's interesting because if that's the case, we're actually going to see as Paul writes his letters, he often has to help people negotiate these kinds of things. We see it in Corinthians a little bit. We see it even more in Romans. So that'd be my way of approaching it. Does that
So we
make
got
sense?
two different, yeah, we have two different interpretations here. Yours is the idea that he's talking about, um, individual burdens of
4
things,
and
something
5.
that's important to me. Yeah, something that's important to the individual, of as far as the law goes, which might not be as important to the next individual.
Yes.
But each one should deal with that accordingly. I still think there's something financial going on here,
Mm.
and I think even 6 lends itself to that. So we have a competing interpretations going.
Yeah. Yeah.
In verse 6, let's read that. So it's Kunonito de o katechumenos ton logon to katechundi in pasin agatius. You translated that earlier. He's talking about the one who receives instruction in the word should share
Uh,
all good things with their instructor. And I wonder if this has to do with that idea of a teacher, being worthy of their wage. And so again, it's got a
Yeah.
financial
Yeah.
sense to it, and that there may
Yeah.
have been some debate going on about this, and whether Paul should be receiving any funding, and maybe he's giving a sort of mini apologetic or defense here that he is worthy of
Yeah.
being financially supported, and that the people who benefit from his
Yeah.
teaching should share all good things, even finances. So that's my understanding.
Yeah. I think that there is something here. I mean, if we're in the realm of teachers, I mean, he basically appeals to fulfill the law of Christ. So Christ is the head teacher, verse 2. And then he calls out someone of thinking that they're self-important, who thinks
Mm-hmm.
himself to be something. And that harkens back to earlier, right? The one seeming to be
Yeah,
important or seeming to be
exactly.
something. So it's
Yes.
interesting, the reverberations of these verses to the
Yeah.
Jesus tradition, kind of making that preeminent, and bearing each other's burdens, not thinking too highly of oneself like some reputed people, hint, hint, back to chapter 2. And then verse 4 and 5, kind of putting it back in the realm of, well, each one has to work these things out, their work, and do this themselves. Regardless, though, if there's a teacher involved, you should share. You should share with them, those who are taught. Yeah, I do think that there's a financial. I think 6 is clearly financial. I think I remember talking with this, working this through this with Luke Post, who was one of my doctoral students, and he was looking at the good in Paul and how to interpret the concept of the good here, and whether there's a financial basis to these verses, because he was looking at it, and I remember talking with him. I can't remember what he concluded in the context, but yeah, I think verse 6 is clearly financial. Yeah. And
Yeah.
this idea of being a burden too, it comes up in Second Corinthians. And Paul says, I hope I'm not a burden to you. I wasn't trying to be a burden to you. When he
Yeah.
says, look, I should have received some things, some help from you, but I don't want to be a burden. So that
Mm,
word burden, verse 2, is a cognate with words that are being used in Second Corinthians to weigh you down.
mm,
Um, Paul was weighed down to the point of death. 2 Corinthians 1
mm.
8.
Paul being weighed down. Yeah.
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 And he says, I
Interesting
hope I
stuff.
wasn't a burden to you. Yeah. So 2 Corinthians 12:16, but be that as may, I did not burden you myself. Nevertheless, crafty fellow that I am, he says, I took you by deceit. So he's responding to charges there of taking money from the collection,
Yeah.
money efforts. But anyway, this word burden is caught up in his conversations with the Corinthians about money. So that's interesting. Yeah. I love the
Well,
fact that verse 6, the kata kao, from where we get catechesis. Catechesis
yeah.
comes from this verb. It's a
Mm,
cognate of kata. So the one being instructed, catechized in the word, to the one doing the catechesis. Yeah.
mm.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm still stuck back on verse 1 too, what it looks like to restore a person gently if they're caught in sin, so that you yourself, I know we've talked about this, but so that you yourself, uh, aren't
Mm.
also falling into temptation
Yeah.
when you restore them.
Yeah. Humbly. I just think that I'm just reminded that, if you see a speck in your brother's eye, Jesus says, right, be careful that you don't have a plank in your own. There's a lot of insight there that people we have big blind spots, and that we're often deflecting or projecting what's going on in our own lives. So there's a real temptation there, I think. So this humility, I think, is really important, and protecting yourself, that you're not also tempted with pride. There might even be spiritual beings, the evil one and his minions might really attach to that kind of hubris and pride. I mean, they may even be allowed to chastise God's people over that kind of thing. So we could be opening ourselves up to kind of attacks of certain sorts. I don't understand what all goes on in the heavenly realms, but there could be, vulnerabilities there. It is important, though, to seek to restore, and the idea that there is need to restore, which is repeatedly found. For example, I was just looking at the end of James. If anyone strays from the truth, and one turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. I mean, that's how James ends. I mean, that's what a way to end. There's also the ending of Jude, which talks about saving someone out of things. Have mercy on some who are doubting, save others, snatching them out of the fire. And on some have mercy with fear, hating even the garment polluted by the flesh. So that, again, that's towards the end of Jude, is this concern to have mercy and to help and to save and snatch, but then be careful of the pollution that can happen with that. Yeah. Well, I think we had fun looking at these verses. I'm intrigued by the present tenseness of these imperatives. This is something we're supposed to be doing repeatedly. So.
Well, you got a parting shot?
I do. Rebecca Pippert, she wrote Out of the Salt Shaker and Into the World. She came and spoke to our faculty last semester. It was great. Sadly, we didn't get a recording of it, but it was phenomenal. So she says, whatever controls us is our Lord. The person who seeks power is controlled by power. The person who seeks acceptance is controlled by acceptance. And we do not control ourselves. So that's the end of her quote. Meaning, we're under a different lordship. We're under the law of Christ. Yeah.
Nice. Right on. Well, we'll stop there. Thanks for your time, Fred, and thank you all for watching. If you would, hit the like button and the subscribe button. More importantly, hit the share button. We appreciate all your support. The podcast is still growing, and we're thankful for everyone who listens and watches and supports ProveText. If you want to get in touch with us, just go to glossahouse.com. You can do that, and we'd love to hear from you. All right, we'll stop there and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.